morning. Welcome to our second work session for the board's consideration and discussion of the superintendent's recommended fiscal year 2024 capital budget and amendments to the FY 2023 through 28 capital improvements program and recommendations on the Clarksburg Elementary School number 9 boundaries. The board will conduct 3 public hearings to hear testimony on these recommendations on November 3rd, 9th, and 14th. We will also hold another work session on November the 10th. If board members offer alternatives today or on November the 10th, the board will hold an additional public hearing on November 15th. As noted during our work session on October 31st, if there are items the superintendent is recommending the board members wish to modify, it would be helpful for affected communities to know about a potential alternative prior to the public hearings. Therefore, I am again suggesting that we identify any alternatives today. If board members wish to identify any alternatives today, they should do so through a motion. If there is a second, a vote will be taken after a brief discussion of the alternative. The majority of the board must vote for an alternative in order to place it before the public for comment. If the alternative is adopted today by the board, staff will notify the affected communities so they may testify to the superintendent's recommendation and the alternative. Please keep in mind that voting for an alternative now does not commit board members to support the alternative when the final action is taken, nor does it preclude the board from making any changes to the CIP when it takes final action. The board is scheduled to take final action on these matters on Thursday, November 17th at 5:30 p.m. Dr. McKnight, do you have any comments?
Thank you, President Wolf, and good morning, board members. Yes, today I look forward to us being able to continue our discussion that we started yesterday. Yesterday we held the first of 3 Board of Education work sessions to review my recommended FY24 capital budget and amendments for the FY23 through 28 CIP. We presented quite a bit of information yesterday. We talked a little bit about the student projections, and we know that's a big part of how we are able to plan outward for our CIP projects. We talked about an overview of my recommended amendments and the recommendations for Clarksburg Elementary School number 9. Today, we're going to follow up on, as we start the conversation yesterday, to talk about some of the things that have impacted our CIP overall. We talked about it yesterday, but of course, increase in inflation, staffing shortages, and a number of other things that have impacted our CIP overall. More specifically, how those things are taken into consideration, our capital improvement program overall. So we'll circle back to that today just to make sure that's clear in the recommendations that are being shared. Today, we're also going to discuss in greater detail the additional funding for each of my recommended amendments to address many of the construction challenges that we have experienced as a result of COVID-19. So we have the staff here from facilities. We're thanking them for coming back today, and we're going to follow up on those conversations. Look forward to engaging in discussion with you as our board members. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Adams.
All right, thank you, Dr. McKnight, and thank you, President Wolf and members of the board. So yes, we're here to dive a little deeper into the conversation yesterday, really talk through some of the specific individual projects, what some of the cost implications are, what is really the nuts and bolts of Dr. McKnight's recommendation. With me today, I have, as you know from yesterday, Ms. Kara Mijas, so her number was not called for jury duty, so she's here with us today, and Ms. Shiho Shibasaki, who is our facilities architect, and she also leads the project manager. She's going to walk us through some of the specifics of our major capital projects and give us a better understanding of where we are and what to expect moving forward. But before we dive into the presentation, we do have a couple follow-ups that Adrian will walk us through, and they are around the enrollment projections, some of the conversation we had yesterday. So as I mentioned yesterday, we have an incredible staff on board. Our demographer is as I think I mentioned, spot on. So we have the data today to show what the trends have looked like from a enrollment projection standpoint. And really just to talk a little bit too, I think as we get back into the boundary study or the boundary recommendation, just what it means around development, how we look at new development, how that's accounted for in our projections, and just give a little bit of background on some of those things. But the first piece is the overall enrollment projections. So if we go to the next slide, actually 2 slides from here, Adrian will kick us off and dive right into the presentation.
If we can go one more slide, please. Actually, one more slide, please. Thank you. So yesterday, we did talk about our enrollment projections. Dr. Joftis did talk, raise some issues regarding enrollment projections, where we are, what those look like. So we wanted to give you a higher level information on our enrollment projections, and then actually the next slide will provide us some details. So if we look, oh no, I'm sorry, go back. Thank you. So if we look at the district-wide projection, so that top left chart, table, says district-wide total projections for FY23. Those projections were what was in our CIP last year for this current school year. So that was 161,211. Our district-wide preliminary September 30th number, so for this school year, it's 161,102. So the difference is 109 students district-wide. So you could see what that percentage is. It's 0.07%. So our projection last year was 109 students higher than what our actual preliminary September 30th number is. And that's district-wide, and we always talk about district-wide. Those numbers are much more closer, much closer than as you get down into schools, grade levels, grade by grade. So on the right, though, we see those numbers, same information, percentage of the 23 enrollment projection compared to the preliminary September 30th. And you could see we did it in sort of in chunks. It's pre-kindergarten, then elementary, basically middle and high. And as you can see, that pre-kindergarten number is a little higher, so that means that more students are here than what we projected last year. For kindergarten, it's at 98%. And for elementary and middle, we're at 99%, so we're almost at that 100%. And for high school, a little higher, just a little bit higher than what was projected. So again, you can get the sense of, again, where that 0.07% sort of comes from, and it's broken down in those grade level chunks. Do you want to show you the next slide? Next slide, please. So here we are doing a little deeper dive. The top right chart is actually what we did was we looked at percentages under and over. So the second column, the first column shows elementary, middle, and high, the school level. The second column is projection plus or minus 5%, meaning we were over plus or minus 5% from what we projected last year. And what you can see overall is we were at 143 schools were either plus or minus 5%. And you could see it broken down. So 98 elementary schools, 24 middle schools, 21 high schools. As we get further between 5 and 10%, that number drops pretty significantly. Elementary dropped all the way down to 29 schools, middle schools at 15, high schools at 4. So for example, there were only 4 high schools among all of our high schools that the projection was between 5 and 10% above, and again, that's above or below. A projection of higher than 10%, you can see that number is very small. It's 10 overall. 9 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and no high schools. And at the elementary school, it is also about pre-K and kindergarten coming in. It's a little harder to project those numbers and what they will be. And so again, you could see the total number is 201. We did not include the special schools, so that's why we're only at 201 and not 210. If you look at the chart, I think the chart is pretty telling. It's a really good visual. So the blue indicates plus or minus 5%. So you can see, if you look at just the blue bar at the elementary, middle, and high, clearly that's the majority of where we are. And I just want to sort of give a little context and example of that. So an elementary school that's 700 students, even if they're 5% over, that's 35 kids overall that they're over. If you divide that by 6, because there's 6 grades, you're talking about 6 kids per grade. At a school that's about 700, you have about 4 classes per grade. So you're talking about 1 and or 2 extra students in that grade, or per classroom overall in that grade. So, and if you do that even across the board, even if you look at the 10%, again, with a school that's 700, an elementary school, that's 70 kids, again, divided by 6 grades, you're talking about less than 10 kids per grade overall. There's 4 classrooms on average. So again, you're talking about 2 kids per grade. At the middle schools and high schools, it's even less impactful. Of course, the number gets larger, but there's so many more kids there. So this is what we wanted to present. Again, as you get out in further years, and we've talked about that, the projections do get a little bit more, you may see a little bit more differences as the 6 years go on. But remember, we do project every year. So we update that information. If we see a trend, let's say in a school that's starting to have turnover, and we see that for 2 years in a row, we will then incorporate that in the enrollment projections so that, again, the out years sort of reflect that change. I guess you want to add?
No, we just felt this was an important conversation. I know the projections are usually a hot topic, a charged topic. Over the years, I think there's been some misunderstandings in terms of what we do and how we do it. When we do get to the boundary recommendation, we're going to talk a little bit about student generation rates. That's another aspect to our process. Student generation rates essentially mean when new development happens, how many students are expected to come from that new development into our school building. So we'll talk about that. That's one of those elements that we actually work with the planning department on, and they provide that information. But we just felt this was a good context for navigating some of those conversations or questions that you may receive around, hey, we're 200 kids over. That's just not the case, right? When we're projecting within 10%, that's 200 kids over is just not something that happens within our projections, and we are very accurate and are able to, in most cases, predict very closely what is expected to happen in a specific community.
I just wanted to say thank you for breaking it down so that we know how many per classroom by dividing the 6. And this, I think, is important for the community to know because they just see the number and they just assume that all the classes are full and people are not sitting, no desks.
I guess the only pushback would be that, like you said, of course, projections are not going to be as accurate 5-6 years out. So if I'm in a community that is rapidly developing, or we're getting an influx of refugees or other students that we couldn't have predicted 5 years ago, how quickly we're able to respond to that sort of influx. And we don't have to answer that now, but I appreciate this. This is very, very helpful. And just knowing that you're doing that each year to correct any new things that we couldn't have known about 5 years is helpful to know.
I think with that, then we can move to the next slide, and we'll start to dive right into the recommendation and.
Excuse me,
oh,
Seth.
I'm so sorry.
Ms. Silvestri has a question.
Yeah, I need to hear that again, Seth. Could you just explain the elementary example one more time, please? Just because that's where you have more.
Yeah, I think Adrian, if Adrian could just walk through the specific numbers again.
So for example, if you have a school that has 700 students in it, and the enrollment projection, the difference between the actual and the projection from the year before, let's say, was off 5%. So 5% would be 35 students it was off. So for example, if last year we projected 700, and there were 7, this year, the preliminary September 30th is 735, that's an increase, that's a 5% difference, increase. If you take those 35 students, because one of the concerns people see is sort of the whole number. They just see that you're 35 students over. But when we think about it for staffing, when we think about it for potentially relocatables, how many classrooms, if you take those 35 students, and of course it's on average, we're just averaging it because we don't know it, they're not all fifth graders that the 35 are over. So if you just average them out, 35 students over 6 grades, and if they have pre-K too, but let's just say 6 grades, then you're talking about 6 additional students per grade level. A 700 enrollment school has probably on average a minimum of 4 classrooms. Some may have 4, some may have 5. So if you think about those 6 students, let's just take a first grade. Those 6 students over 4 classrooms, you're talking about not even 2 kids, an additional 2 kids per classroom that would affect. Actually, it's really 1 and 2 would have, 1.5. There is really no 1.5, but, so when we talk about plus or minus, and, we have had conversations, our demographer, Robin O'Hara, works with and collaborates with other demographers in Maryland, in Virginia. She actually was in Virginia as well, so she has that conversation all the time. There is sort of a standard of what is sort of an acceptable of a difference, plus or minus. Even, when we had our consultants in a number of years ago, that plus or minus, which is sort of a standard, would be 10%. So an acceptable difference between a projection and an actual is a 10%. And again, even 10%, again, at an elementary school, you're talking about one that's 700, a 700 elementary school, you're talking about 70 kids divided by 6. Again, you're about 10 kids or so. If you have 4 classrooms, you're talking about 2 kids, 2 additional kids. Now, for staffing, that may change. So if an elementary school, a first grade class is at 24, 25, depending on what staffing is, that may throw over another if all the other classes are at that high level. But it isn't, or if they're overcrowded, you may need a relocatable, again, depending, but it isn't that 5% or that even 10%. And when you go to the middle schools and high schools, it's even less impactful. So example of a high school even at 10%, a high school that's 2,000 students at 10% over, that's 200 kids. If, again, averaging it out, 50 kids per grade level. 50 kids per grade level at a 2,000 elementary high school, that's really not impactful. Not that we don't want to get it as close as we can, because we do use our enrollment projections to look at capital projects. And that's why every year we redo them, we look at trends, we try to make changes where we can. But from year to year, that 5% is not overall impactful at the school, depending again on staffing.
So I think we hear most from the 9 elementary schools, for example, that are at 10 and above. And just curious, like what do you attribute those 9? I mean, what's happened? Do you have case studies to figure out what went wrong? Is it all pre-K?
So I think that they could be a couple of different things. I think the 9 in one of those, and it's probably the elementary school, is William B. Gibbs, because we had the COSA. And of course, that wasn't in the projection last year. Right. So probably that is one right there. There could be other things. There could be, immigration issues that we see coming into our school, and for whatever reason, it is a particular school. It could be a turnover, which was the example that I gave, that the neighborhood is just starting to turn over, and in that first year, we probably wouldn't immediately jump to, okay, all of a sudden it is a now trend and we have to incorporate it. We probably would wait another year to see whether that actually is a trend and just not an anomaly. So I think that there are various situations that could happen. Development that we thought was going to be at a slower pace all of a sudden becomes, 100 families move in that they, for whatever reason. So I think that there's specific things. We certainly can look at those. There are very few of those higher than 10%. But certainly, we could take a look at it and see. But I think that those are sort of the anomalies to what is the majority, which is the 5%.
Okay. And I think you said that you adjust to those anomalies with additional staffing and portables. Portables are our way to give
Certainly
us.
if it is needed at the school.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Seth. You can continue.
Oh, I was gonna say,
I'm
can
sorry.
I just want a quick question? Would you, in your personal opinions, think that, so I tend to feel like the things that we hear from, the people that we hear from, is their issues are less about the projections than more just about the fact that their school's not big enough when their community's growing. And so how we address that, I feel like, is a little different than trying to say it's only a couple kids, like Clarksburg being one of the biggest. They're like, why aren't you making the schools bigger if you know that this is coming? So.
Well, one of the things that, and we'll talk a little bit further in some of the programming, but one of the things that we've also faced over the past several years are the additional supports required at some of our schools, whether, if you look at an elementary school, a Title I elementary school, the supports that are needed. I just quickly went to the book, and you see a Twin Brook Elementary School who right now has 139 seats available, but they're using every one of those spaces plus the portable classrooms that we have out there. So in some cases there is a deficit of supports. That you feel different impacts at the schools. What we found is a lot of schools start to take advantage of classrooms for their support, so that starts to reduce the number of available classrooms requiring different portable uses. So I do think over the past 10 years, and as the blueprint obviously is also starting to evolve, we are taking a step back, looking at each of our schools a little differently, looking at it from what programs are there, what are those programs influencing from a space need, and then really just starting to look at these buildings a little differently in terms of how they operate and what we need to plan for the future. And that's one of the things that's been sort of eye-opening to us is you could have two schools that are identical, right? We do that all the time. We build schools that are repeat designs. One school in a community that has different support needs could have very different deficits as opposed to a school that even has higher student enrollment at the same school. So it's just starting to look at the buildings a little differently and understanding, what are the program influences as we move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Adams, and thank you for that question, Ms. Majowski, because this is something that we've been talking about, I would say probably over the last year, more so than we have before. As a matter of fact, as we get prepared for facilities, one of the processes that we kind of updated and shifted was to bring in our program people and to really talk about the programming needs before we even begin the process of thinking about what are all the implications for the CIP, to the very point that Mr. Adams have made. And that is different, but I think we recognize it through a process of getting, feedback, looking at trend data overall over time in terms of what's happening in some of our schools, and taking more of a forward approach to that. So it's different, but I do think it's one that's going to yield us some results in a very different way moving forward from looking at the CIP part completely different from programming, but bringing the two together.
No, I really appreciate that, because that was part of where I was going. That and the also kind of pre-planning, even outdoor spaces, little extra blacktop. I mean, I know we like to keep as much green as possible or whatever, but as portables come in, that's one of the things that we hear most frequently is about the outdoor activity areas and stuff like that. So just knowing that we're planning ahead as much as possible, I think, makes a big difference to our community.
Absolutely. And then that point as well about the size, and I think the board may have had this conversation a couple years ago about us taking that into consideration about the size of our elementary schools. What I do know from our community, and we continue to get this information when we give out the surveys, they are very invested in those schools feeling like a community. And we know that while some of our principals do a magnificent job, and our staff at our smaller elementary schools to address things differently to make sure the culture is not lost in it. We also want to make sure we're taking that into consideration, because my desire is not to build these large elementary schools, knowing developmentally for our students that they need that support. They need to feel a part of the community, how they navigate the design. I mean, you go to the Wright Middle School on the first week of school, and you have sixth graders who are struggling to get around the building and to navigate all of those things. So we even know that about sixth graders at the middle school level, and the things that we have to take into consideration for how they can successfully navigate that. We have to do the same for our elementary students. Some of them knowing this is their first introduction to a structured educational space. So we do not want to build elementary schools the size of our high schools, or middle schools in that sense, but we do want to make sure we're staying attuned to the needs and what's happening in the community. And as we discussed yesterday, we had so much conversation this past summer about the growth in Clarksburg specifically, so that we could try to project outwardly what was to come, so that we are not in the situation in which we're, packing a school to its capacity right when we open it. Because we also know that's difficult as well. So, thank you. Mr. Adams?
Thank you, Mr. Adams. I think, thank you for sharing the complexities of that. I think our community oftentimes forgets how difficult that job is. So please continue.
All right. Well, so the next series of slides, we'll transition over to Shiho to talk through these. But we do feel it's very important as we talk about the additional costs that are part of the inflationary pressures to obviously walk through what that is, right? So for us, it's very important that when we go to the county executive, we go to the county council to be able to say, these are the influencing factors of why this request is what it looks like. So Shiho is going to walk us through some of the background of the inflationary pressures, what we've experienced from a general construction standpoint, just to frame it for us all, and then we'll obviously start to move into very specific project elements. So that, if we go to the next slide, and I'll turn it over to Shiho.
So as he mentioned about the challenges, so actually there are like various different challenges we are facing right now. And one is a significant construction cost increase and the supply chain delays, material delays. Actually, some of the electrical equipment takes about like almost a year to get it. And so we have to release some of those materials ahead of time. And like bus drivers and teachers, we have like facing staffing shortages in labors and productions. And on the left side of the chart shows the commodity price movement from 2019, and about like starting mid 2020, we see the increase of all the prices. Like the top orange line shows the power wire cost, and then the next one is a dark blue one, shows the price of the copper and the cables, and the yellow one is the price of the nails, and the next lighter orange is, oh, I'm sorry, like actually the dark blue one was steel, and then the light orange one is actually copper wires. I'm sorry, I couldn't read, too small. So yeah. And then the light blue one is like asphalt and the gypsum board and so on. So we actually see a lot of price increases of almost like all the materials. And the chart in the middle shows the price of input to residential construction. And we actually saw a little bit of decrease in last year, but we started to show the sharp increase again this year. And the graphic at the bottom shows some of the construction materials price increase again. Aluminum price increased 20%. Plastic went 14.2%. Actually, the lumber and the plywood went almost up to like 86%. And steel millwork is like 67% increase. And the copper brass is like 49%. And they are all like very essential elements for the construction. So.
Yeah, one thing I would point out in that the middle chart that shows the essentially residential, but it's very equivalent to commercial as well. Last year when we met, we were on that first spike, and it was trending down. I think for all intents and purposes at that point, we thought the trend down would stay. Obviously, you see that trend definitely not only went back up, but it went even higher than where it was a year ago. And obviously that has impacted many of our projects. The one thing that Shio is going to talk about on the next slide is that part of the strategies too are bidding strategies when the time of year that we do bid. Luckily for us, many of our projects that are now under construction were bid in the dip. So that is one of our strategies, is to manage and make sure that we align projects, and that will come into play in terms of when we talk about projects and timelines of completion and those sorts of things. But I just thought that graph was really telling from where we sat a year ago, because I don't think anyone could have ever envisioned that it would have not only gone back up, but gone back up even significantly higher than where we were during that time. So if we go to the next slide.
Mr. Adams, one other thing I wanted to just emphasize to the board is that this is not an issue that's unique to Montgomery County Public Schools. Just a few weeks ago, superintendents across the state were able to engage in a conversation having this very same challenge. As you would imagine, every CIP budget across the state has been impacted by many of the challenges that we are discussing here. Of course, for us being the largest school system in the state, having more projects and having an expectation of how we consider building the facilities, to our point of programs and a number of other needs that we have to address our community needs around facilities, we are significantly impacted. But I will tell you, it's not unique to us. As I heard others sharing, they're seeing like a 40% increase in many of the projects that they also had planned for in the CIP. So it'll be a very interesting year just across the state to also see how others are navigating this very issue.
Can I ask a quick question about the cost increases and stuff? When you're talking about part of the strategy being determining when to place the bids and things like that, what is it that, to me, I would say lumber's increase mostly because it's a resource that's depleting, or, I don't really know necessarily all of the aspects that make it go up so high, but why would we think that it would come down anytime soon?
Well, so lumber actually did come down at one point and then spiked back up again. One of the elements in that, from a commodity tracking standpoint, which we'll talk about in a second, is really understanding, what are the trends that we're seeing, and is there an expectation that will go up? So part of the work is to look at what's happening around. What is the development that's happening around the country? Many of the projects that maybe were labor intensive were put on hold during the pandemic, started back up. So there was this massive need. At the same time, a lot of the factories shut down during COVID, and there was no way for them to catch up. So there was some of those things happening. Another nuance to the pandemic is what is called sort of material hoarding. A lot of contractors have gone out and purchased large amounts of materials, and then they sell them at higher costs to different vendors and whatnot. So it's become very scarce, and then when it is available, it's at higher cost than market value. we're obviously, we're not 100% control of that because we don't control the vendor market or the manufacturing market, but we are working with our subcontractors to be very strategic in terms of, when to purchase. Is storage a better option than more of the on-demand type of approach that we've historically gone down? And then, obviously working with vendors too. There's been a lot of markets, and I would say drywall, for instance, they imposed purchasing limits on a lot of their products to manage some of this product hoarding that was happening. But what that meant was that they would put limits on materials. Contractors are not able to purchase all the materials they need for our projects, and then 6 months later they're able to purchase more, but it's at a higher cost. And so when they come back to us and say, well, the costs have changed and it's out of our control, again, that's part of some of the strategies that we're navigating through existing projects in terms of, and we're sort of getting into a lot of the slide here, but, risks of escalation costs and being fair, but also protecting the Board of Ed and the taxpayer dollar throughout this process as well. So it is, this is a game changer for this industry as a whole. I think it's been eye-opening for a lot of organizations. The public is protected through what's called, payment performance bonds, meaning, we enter into a contract and theoretically there's funding that would support the continuation of a public project. We're seeing through this process that that is not as beneficial, and there's changes to even that larger bonding program that we've been accustomed to. So this has been truly a game changer, and one that I think we have to navigate a little differently on basically a monthly basis here to make sure we're trying to keep these projects on track. I would say, though, the one thing that is and this is again getting a little ahead of some of the presentation pieces, but as Shio pointed out, some of the commodities, some of the products, like electrical components, that you used to be able to receive within a month or two, now take over a year. So the project we're tracking for opening next summer, we're hearing from major electric providers, Pepco, saying transformers may or may not be there to power the school. So for us, we're working on backup plans, generators, you name it, to figure out how to make sure that we open. But there's some things that are definitely well outside of the norm that have caused some challenges, and for us to take a little bit of a different approach to each project to make sure we navigate this.
Thank you. Continue.
Okay, so as Mr. Adams mentioned, to manage the cost increase and the supply chain issues, so one of the things we did is reducing the square footage to maximizing the building efficiency. And actually, one example is we actually moved exterior wall of the building 2 feet, which seems like a minor square footage reduction, but when it's multiplied as a whole building, we can reduce significant square footage of the building footprint and to reduce the cost. And also we are doing like value engineering and material selections. And one example is we actually changed the CMU wall to the stud wall in order to reduce the cost of the material and actually the duration of the construction as well. However, and then by doing that, we actually reduce the weight of the material, so we could reduce the size of the structural support, or like floor slab thickness, or like foundation sizes. So those are the things actually we are doing to reduce the cost by changing the materials. And commodity tracking is, as Mr. Adams was explaining, that we are actually looking into like building material cost forecast, well advanced, and then so that will help us aligning the bid process in order to evaluating and maximizing the dips in the market. And one example is actually we separated some of the site package earlier while design team is still finalizing the design, because some of the material takes much longer lead time, so the contractor can release the materials and they can start fabricating while design team is still designing. And the contract modifications to minimize risks through the escalation clause changes. That is like allowing contractor to actually include some of the escalation to prevent unnecessary cost increase. And the schedule evaluation is to focus on reducing escalation exposure. And that's actually like releasing the materials a little bit ahead of time. So when we see some of the escalation ahead of time, then we can release the materials. And as Mr. Adams mentioned, this one, leveraging storage for high-risk, long lead items. So we can get the materials and make sure the contractor can get the materials on time to prevent impacting on their construction schedule and the time. Next slide, please. Oh, do you want to?
Yeah, so this next one, and then that's sort of just framing in terms of where these costs are coming from, and also hopefully assuring those that are involved in making decisions around costs that we are trying every option possible to mitigate and navigate these challenges, to obviously be stewards of the taxpayer dollars. As we move into the next slide, this is, we wanted to include this as just a reminder of where we are within this particular request. And this is, as Adrienne mentioned, on the left side, I think yesterday when we were talking about appropriations versus the expenditures, the appropriation on the left, right next to the total approved and total recommended, the appropriation is basically saying that this is the money needed to enter into a contract. This is the total value. And then everything to the right is the expenditures, meaning this is how to balance your checkbook throughout the process. The county really focuses in on the expenditures. The expenditures on a year by year, they obviously need to make sure that there's enough money in their bank account to be able to process these payments throughout. So this is obviously very important to the county as they look at Dr. McKnight's recommendation to understand what the expenditures would be based on this particular request. The one thing I would point out to this is that getting close to $400 million a year in expenditures is extremely high. But at the same time, that is exactly as Adrienne mentioned yesterday, due to the fact that we have never constructed this many high schools at the same time before. And high schools are very large dollar, high dollar projects that obviously would influence this number. So again, this is just a reminder before we move into the specific projects and specific amounts that are part of the recommendation. So if we go to the next slide.
So for the Greencastle Elementary School addition, this is actually the classroom and support space addition, because there are actually 10 relocatable classrooms right now at the school. And the architectural selection was approved by the Board of Ed a few weeks ago, and we actually have a first community engagement meeting tonight. And we met with the school staff and the principal about the scope of work and discuss about their needs. And completion date is August of 2025. And recommended funding is $4 million, which is due to the inflationary pressure. And John Lelek Elementary School at Broadacres. This is actually originally it was like 3 to 5 building, and because there are like 12 relocatable classrooms right now, but as we explore the options, we feel like tearing down and replacement with a new building is probably the better idea. And we actually had our first community work sessions last week, and we actually had a lot of participants, like filled the cafeteria, and we actually had a presentation in English and Spanish, and actually we received the great feedbacks from them about how they feel like positive about going to the holding facilities while the existing building will be demolished and built new. So Currently, the completion date is August of 2025, but with this recommended funding, we recommend completion date of August 2026. And this is also because of the change in scope and the inflationary pressures.
And just on this one, we have been talking about Joanne Lullick project for 3 years now. One of the challenges, obviously, with this site is that the park owns the surrounding property. Actually, even where part of our building is located is park owned. And we've really tried to work to figure out, is there a way to stay within our property bounds? And if we did go over into the parks, what were potential impacts because of that? So this community engagement process was truly tremendous. We had a great turnout, and we walked through it together. We walked through it from an addition. What would that look like? We talked about the idea of possibly going to a holding facility as we constructed a new building, and then even this phased while renovated concept as well. And the reason that we went through all these steps is this is over 80% walkers. So obviously that's going to be very impactful to leave the site, but really the overwhelming response was supportive of creating a new space that would serve this community's needs versus just spending money on a very expensive addition that we would still have antiquated spaces that possibly would require major modification in the future. So this is part of the recommendation. As you can see, there's $32 million in there, and it is an increase of $14 million, which is partially inflationary. The scope to go to a brand new school is actually not necessarily an influencer of that $14 million. A lot of it is inflationary. So we did work with the architects to figure out options that would fit with the existing budget and rebuild in that same space. So this is one we're very excited for, and obviously, hopefully we'll have great conversation at the public hearings about this one as well. So sorry about that.
That's a quick question. I was going to ask Mr. Adams, I remember that the majority of the students there walked. Now, how far is the holding facility? I'm sure we'll provide transportation, but is it really far from where the?
So it would be the Fairland facility, which I think when you first hear that, you say, well, that's a pretty far distance, but it is pretty much a straight route up New Hampshire, Boulevard up there. So I think when we mapped it, it was not as far as we even thought, but it is something that, as we have further conversations in the community, we'll talk everything about public transit and different access opportunities if this ultimately is something that the board supports.
Okay, perfect. I know they're anxious to get a new space, so the holding facility would not be a holdup for them if it means that they will get a new school. So thank you. And just thank you for how you've explained how much attention has gone into trying to reduce costs and just really be effective, because this is really different. I think it's important that our community hear this, and I hope we can post some of this information somewhere. It's particularly the 2 slides ahead where we have the example of the challenges and we have the pictures, because it just helps to show that. And I know it'll be great to share this with our county council, the county executive. Thank you.
Bethesda Beat. Can I just want, following up with that, so if you do the new building, they would basically stay where they are now, they wouldn't need a holding facility, correct?
No,
Or that would be in the same spot, so you'd have to.
Yes. So one of the options was to construct a new building on the primary park fields. And we did hear from that community pretty overwhelmingly that those fields are very important to their daily lives as well.
Okay.
So in that conversation, sort of that option was less desirable than moving to a holding facility for the 18 months and rebuilding in basically the exact same location as the current footprint. The difference being the new way we build has a much smaller footprint.
Right.
So that building is a bit sprawled out, if you recall some of the Gaithersburg Elementary conversations that we had. So we can make some major improvements to pedestrian and vehicular access on that site at the same time.
Which is great. But there's also some overcrowding in that area still, correct? So I guess my question is, are we looking at is if you're doing a new building, would it be a pre-K through 5 to address extra overcrowding? Yeah, Okay, that's what I would
It
hope
would,
for.
it would essentially be equivalent to what we're constructing at South Lake right now,
Okay.
based on their enrollment and, thinking about it from a community school standpoint and the supports that they would need. So we have a great starting point for that particular school based on what we've designed and are building at South Lake for the South Lake community at the moment. And it's a similar population from an
Yes.
enrollment standpoint as
Correct.
well. So enrollments are very equal,
Yep.
very equivalent. So we can accommodate all the students with the one build based on our current enrollment and the projections there.
Okay, I just meant too, in terms of pulling from other schools if it need be, if we're building anyways.
Oh, they can fill a school up just based on their current enrollment, so.
So when would they be moving to the holding school?
Well, so this is a slight change in scope, so we would need, the board's approval on this one. The good thing with this particular project is we're fully funded for design. So if this were a change of scope approved, we could move directly into design, and we would be about 18 months away from transitioning into the holding facility.
So then Burnt Mills is on schedule to move out of the holding
Yes,
facility?
yes.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
For Silver Spring International Middle School addition, this project is because right now the current gymnasium is detached from the main building, and so and there is actually an existing abandoned auditorium, and so we are planning to demolish the existing auditorium and build a new physical education facilities like a main gymnasium with stage and locker rooms. And actually, this site will be impacted by the purple line, just so you know. And the mandatory referral process has been completed already, and the design is 95% completed. And we're going to go into the bid process in coming months, and the construction will be starting hopefully next summer of 2023. And we are recommended funding for $5 million because of the inflationary pressures. And for Crown High School, this is a new high school in the city of Gaithersburg, and to address overutilization in the Mid-County region. And this project right now is in the design development phase, and we are working with all the curriculum staff to get all their feedbacks. And the completion date of the construction is August 2027, and hopefully we can start the construction in beginning of 2025. And the recommended funding is $50 million due to the inflationary pressure. And the next project is Northwood High School. This is actually a tear down of existing building and replaced with a brand new building. And actually during the duration of 2 years of rebuilding this school, the whole school will be moving into the new Woodward High School as a swing space, and they will come back to the new facility when the project will be completed summer of 2023. No, 2026. And sorry. And then the recommended funding is $30 million, and this is inflationary pressure, and much of this cost is because of the tighter schedule, which is like 24 months to demolish the high school and rebuild the new high school. It's very tight schedule. So, and this is actually affecting the labor cost and the material cost as well. And the Poolsville High School is actually, construction has been started already, but we are recommended $8 million funding, which is because of the inflationary pressure as well as escalation of materials, and it's also because due to the continuous changes around the gymnasium design, And actually, it's a phased occupied construction, which means like students are still in the building while the constructions are going on. So that's actually adding the cost to the project. And the last one is Charles W. Woodward High School project, and the recommended funding is $15 million. And the phase 1 of this project has been started already, and the construction is actually underway. And the phase 1 will be completed summer of 2024 when the Northwood students move into the building. And we are in the phase 2 of the design. And phase 2 includes new auditorium, parking structure, all the athletic facilities, and the second gymnasium. And the phase 2 will be constructed while the Northwood students are there. And this increase of $50 million is because of the inflationary pressure of the phase 2.
So just one piece on, I would point out, particularly on Poolesville and Woodward. So Poolesville, this is based, you know, as Shio mentioned, around some of the escalationary pressures that we're seeing as this project has been broken up into a couple phases. But we are also counting for the gymnasium that the community has been obviously requesting, as well as a smaller secondary gym. So it's actually turning into a main gym and a second smaller auxiliary gym as we're going through. So this funding is important for that project. The Woodward piece, so for phase 2, we have said that the phase 1 will be completed a bit ahead of when Northwood would move in. So we are also really trying to aggressively plan to have some of that phase 2 work done before Northwood arrives. So that's something that we've talked about with the Northwood parents. We've met with them a couple times now, and some of their concerns obviously are still primarily focused around transportation and access, but also just understanding what's happening from a build standpoint during their stay there. But as you can see, these add up to the $91 million that is part of the inflationary piece that is associated with this particular capital improvements request. The last piece on this that I want to point out that is really, really important. So for example, the Silver Spring International Middle School addition. Right now it's currently funded at $23.14 million. All estimates are showing that it will be $5 million more, right around that $28.1 million. If that project does not receive those additional funds through this process, you did hear the timeline of bidding and when we would like to start, which is this coming summer. If that funding is not received and that project does come in over budget as we're expecting it to with its current funding, the project basically goes on hold. You know, we cannot start a project like Silver Spring International until we have the full funding for that full bid of what we see from the contracting community. So that's why we are obviously flagging this as a critical importance from a funding standpoint, because the alternative is if projects come in over budget, they basically stop until we figure out as a county how to fund it. And that's really what we're trying to avoid here is to see projects stop and then obviously to be able to maintain these completion schedules.
Seth, when this all gets forwarded to the county council, are they going to be picking it based on project, or are they giving us a dollar amount and we get to determine how the money's spent?
Historically, the county executive provides just a large budget number.
Correct.
And historically, what has happened is the Educational and Culture Committee, at request from Dr. McKnight, non-recommended reductions if they're unable to come up with the, which could make this very difficult, process, obviously.
I just know some council members advocate for particular projects because it's, in their communities and that's who they're hearing from. So I wasn't sure if we got to make that determination or if they did.
Yes, no, thank you. We definitely asked for our CIP to be budgeted. I mean, and that's why we spend this time sharing with you and our entire community why we're bringing these projects forward and the implications of them. Of course, we're requesting this, and we're requesting you to fund this because these are the things that we know are important to you, our community, and to keep us on track. Those non-recommended recommendations, are those things that require us to go back and not really be what we want to do, but forces us to be much more conservative in this than we want to oftentimes. So right now, our focus is to really say, this is what we need, this is why we need it, and hope that our community as well as our government officials will see that the same. I mean, I know this presentation is going into far more details than we normally go into, but we thought it was really important to cover this at this level just so that you as board members and others can really see all the details from projections to costs to prioritization in each of these projects. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think it's important, as we've been talking about a lot, especially over the past 18 months, more clarity, more transparency, no surprises in this work. So devil's advocate, the request is not fully funded, and then we'll be back here having this conversation again, looking at how much of the additional funding request is received and how we can allocate that given the projects that we want to keep on track very much. So, yeah, that'd be a fun conversation.
Every year.
Exactly.
Mr. Adams, question, I didn't understand why Northwood has such a large price tag, 30 million.
So the 30 million for Northwood, really, from transitioning to what we talked about from lead time and durations that we see in construction, Northwood is scheduled to be constructed in 2 years as opposed to 3 years, which it typically takes to build a high school. So that accelerated timeline is going to create some obviously logistical challenges. It always had those logistical challenges, but it never saw materials take over a year to receive. So it's a very different thought process and approach. And that number is directly from the contracting community. We have a construction manager on that project, and they're working through various models of how to sequence a project, what essentially double stacking would need to take place in order to build that, meaning multiple trades on top of each other, and what extended hours, durations would look like for that to occur. So that is a number that really is a direct correlation to the 2-year build that we have.
And your Silver Spring International example, that's not unique to Silver Spring International. All of these projects are in the same boat. If they're not funded, it stops. Correct?
That's correct. So the every one of these projects will bid at some point in FY24, meaning that that appropriation, assuming it's high enough, would need to be in place to cover the cost of the contract. So I really just use Silver Spring International as just one of the examples, but yes, it applies to all of them. Particularly you think about like a Woodward or in a Northwood, where they are really tied to this 2026 timeline, and obviously making sure that they both are bid and start in the next fiscal year is really critical to the completion. So if there's any sort of stop in that process, meaning if it does come in over budget and we have to stop, those completion dates are severely at risk at that point.
Don't we lock in our budget amounts, though, at some point? Say, in other words, you can't come in over too much over budget because this is what we agreed upon?
Well, so there's no general agreement in the public bid process. What we do is we do work with the designers to say, this is our budget, this is what we have. But at some point, after we've gone through all the value engineering and other material selections, you get to a point where you need to start reducing the square footage or the scope of work to a point where it doesn't even make sense anymore, right? It doesn't meet the basic necessities that we need as a school district. So that's unfortunately where we are. We've reduced to the point where if there's anything more to cut out of the project, we really start to say to ourselves, does it even make sense to build it in this way? Because if you're not going to do it right, if you're not going to build for the needs of the community, for the school, for obviously the program, then why are you doing it? So we're at that bare bones bottom line number with our architectural firms, and now we're just it's a market value process now. So again, trying to fit all those pieces together.
Yeah, just, and again, I acknowledge this because getting a little into the kind of crystal ball territory, but, we're talking the inflationary pressures, we can clearly see the supply chain disruptions. We've also talked about just the link, how that supply chain timeline has increased so much for some materials and goods. And just doing some reading, we see labor cost increases sort of nationally, but so far it doesn't seem like in this area we've seen the labor shortages issue in construction that some areas of the country have seen. Are we, again, crystal ball territory, but are we fairly certain that our labor supply in the construction industry is going to be available for the projects?
No, labor supply in construction has been a challenge for decades, and we're actually really starting to see it become a true challenge, not only from a cost, but even from completion time frames. I would say you look back on the work that took place to open Harriet Tubman Elementary School. The contracting team really worked incredibly hard through a pandemic to obviously open that school. But what we start to experience is that where we could rely on overtime, we could rely on 6-7 days a week of work. The labor force is saying no more. So just again thinking about the labor force as a whole. We as a nation have really done a terrible job of thinking about construction as a critical role and a critical need, and we are starting to see it, but we're obviously seeing it from a perspective of twofold. They're overworked, and there's not enough individuals to obviously do the work that's required. So it's something that we're very concerned with, obviously.
Well, we do have a couple of sources right here in MCPS with our construction technology programs at Seneca Valley and Edison. Maybe we need to convince those students they just want to sign right on to some of those construction projects as soon as they're done.
All right. So next slide, please. And I'll be brief through one of these, but the first one I'm going to spend a little bit of time on. But so we did talk yesterday about Burnsville. This is an increase to that particular project of $29.873 million. I would say this, while we talked about Joe and Lullock as a slight change in approach, this Burtonsville is a change of scope as well, but probably a bit more significant from where we were coming from as a smaller scale addition to a larger new school build. Just to reiterate, so from a community standpoint, this still does require an incredible amount of community engagement. But as we talked about this, and I think as Dr. McKnight also mentioned yesterday, through the discussions, really understanding that building, the needs of the community, the needs of the students, and then also understanding what our needs as a school district are from everything from blueprint to other programmatic needs. It does make sense for a new school to be constructed on the dedicated property that we do have. Again, that will obviously take an incredible amount of community engagement to navigate all the steps and the nuances associated with that recommendation, but that is part of this CIP recommendation to you all. The next piece is the building modification and program improvements. Again, BMPI, as we talked about, this is again an increase of $10 million. We've historically been funded around $8 million for this program. So $10 million is what we feel is necessary to obviously navigate some of the different programs and the different expectations that we're seeing both from program and students. So what would fit under the BMPI program are obviously elements associated with Blueprint, pre-K. Pre-K is not only just the pre-K, but our PEP program through special ed. It does include work that we're exploring through inclusive restrooms, thinking very differently about those restroom facilities. We have some pilot projects that we were coming out with that are very, very different than what we've seen in the past, and having single user, multiple spaces that are part of a corridor area versus having closed restroom facilities. So we're excited about that and what that means to our schools and our communities. And projects, and I would say critical projects like at Watkins Mill High School, the culinary arts program, bringing that up to acceptable standards, bringing in commercial equipment, those are the types of projects that fit under the BMPI program, and the reason why we feel this $10 million is critical to this work. The HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning program, as Adrian mentioned yesterday, is a $10 million increase. That is both due to the inflationary pressures that we saw, but also we did see a reduction in the HVAC program through the last council budgetary process. So this is a program that I think is near and dear to all of us. It is critical to our schools, and I venture to say public testimony, that's what we mostly hear about is HVAC challenges. So this is one of those programs that obviously we feel is incredibly important as a priority. Particularly as we've implemented quite a few indoor air quality changes and modifications throughout the pandemic process as well.
Mr. Adams, quick question. Does that include some of the air remediation strategies related to sort of COVID remediation strategies in terms of the air quality? Is that included within that?
Yes, this is the program that only does full replacements of buildings, but also our indoor air quality capital program is housed in this particular program. So yes, everything that we've talked about over the past several years around our mitigation strategies is funded through this particular program. And then the last one on this slide is restoring funds to the materials management building. That is that $2.5 million that we discussed yesterday for the design, but also includes site selection and some of that feasibility study work. And I would just point out this one is critical to our conversations around equity and community enhancement building. This is the facility that's located on Stone Street, which is part of the Lincoln Park community, and one that I think we've all heard from that community that the building is certainly unacceptable. Obviously, not only from a operations standpoint of what we need it for, but also from a community standpoint and how we value our communities.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, the city of Rockville's obviously very interested in this as well, so perhaps they could partner with us in some way, shape or form, particularly funding.
Yeah. So we have been in conversation with the city of Rockville as well as the county generally over the past year about our desire to be able to address the Stone Street property. I mean, everybody has the same interest that we have, preserving the community, and from our employees' perspective, just giving them a space where they can actually utilize it in a way as staff is important. So we're working through that. We also want to be, very sensitive because I know there are, a number of other projects happening in other places, and we just want to be sensitive to that as a school system. But we have been in conversation with them and will continue to. But it's nice that we have a number of our other county leaders who are also interested and invested in making sure that we address the needs at Stone Street, as I know this has been a topic of discussion for years now. But we've got to do something.
I just had a question about relocation for the materials management? Where? I'm just curious.
Well, so that's part of the funding would include the site selection.
Oh, my
of
Forget it. Oh, my God. Rockville wants us out of there in such a way.
It's a great question, because I think a lot of folks view that building as just move.
It's terrible.
Without really understanding the importance of
Yeah.
our material Department of Materials Management. I mean, the services they provide to our schools are incredibly extensive. So, the continuity of that operation is critical to, figuring out where we can move, how we can move our operations over, and then obviously maintain the continuity of services to our schools.
It's an incredibly important building that a lot of people haven't been in, and I have to commend the workers for having been there and not coming to complain about it every day. Thank you.
Ms. Evans?
Absolutely. I was going to say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad we're doing something, and this should not be delayed. Can you just say real briefly what's housed in the material management building for people to know? I mean, you don't have to go into detail, but if people just knew what's there, and Dr. McKnight said it, that we've put this off, right? And so we have to do this.
Well,
Just real briefly.
when you think about it from just a supply chain perspective, right? Our materials management warehouse, everything that happens there is the receivables that go to schools. So schools that require paper, require books, require furniture, require any element to their custodial supplies goes through the warehouse operation and is distributed to each of our schools. Our print shop there, so a lot of our materials, academic materials that go to schools, that's housed there. Our technology teams are also housed there from a recycle center standpoint, but also prep for the major tech mod renovation work that happens. So things that happen behind the scenes that I think, if they didn't happen, you would have more phone calls and emails in your inbox than I think would be imaginable, because of how critical those services are that they provide.
Thank you. I know we know, but the millions of viewers that are watching, they may not be aware, right? No, but I just wanted the people that are watching just to understand and get an idea, because we say materials, but that just may not resonate, but it's just everything. I mean, I've been there. When you see the trucks, I mean, even the food, some of the, you just said it, markers, pens, I mean, just everything, non-perishable, absolutely. I didn't mean perishable, non-perishable, but it's a lot of stuff, so, thank you.
Thank you. Continue.
All right, so if we can go to the next slide. And so again, just to round out the last of the additional increases, relocatable classrooms, we talked about this yesterday. One of the nuances here is obviously some of our increases in enrollment, but also understanding implications of pre-K and our PEP programs. There is a requirement to go to full-day programs, so we do have a lot of half-day programs, so just obviously the implementation of that is going to be pretty space intensive, and just preparing for that. And this is not to say the pre-K would go in relocatable classrooms, but just providing those relocatable classrooms for whether it be supports or other higher grade level classrooms would be critical. School security, this is obviously one that's always extremely important. We have been funded in this for several years, but at a lower level. And through many of our conversations with our Department of Security, Safety and Security teams, just thinking through where we need to go from a 21st century technology infrastructure perspective. We have piloted in several locations a variety of different technologies, whether they be electronic swipe cards in classrooms, to different PA systems that are able to connect and do much more than what they currently do in support of our security functions. So this to us is obviously extremely critical from additional funding standpoint. And then the last one is the stormwater discharge and water quality, and this $2.92 million is directly correlated to the Safe School Drinking Water Act legislation. As you all maybe recall, the legislation changed the acceptable lead levels from 20 parts per billion, which is the EPA standard, down to 5 parts per billion. One of the challenges that we have is the manufacturing world is still at 20 parts per billion. So, many of our systems do have challenges meeting that new legislative level of 5 parts per billion. So this will continue to add water bottle filling stations. It will add filters where we need filters. And most likely in the next CIP, we will be coming back to talk more about bubblers in our elementary school classrooms. Those are becoming more and more of a challenge, and ones that we will most likely have to transition from at some point. And the alternative obviously being looking at filtered ways to provide easy access to students without disruptions to the classroom is going to be a big part of that work. So again, all that adds up to 60.29, and if you add that to the 91 from inflationary pressures, gets us to the 151.29 million that is part of this request.
Seth, can you tell me what security technology involves?
So from a technology standpoint, we are looking at our buildings from the perspective of electronic access for our first responders, but also for the security integrity of our buildings throughout the school year as well. So when you think about technology, we have at 2 schools right now, electronic swipes to get into classrooms. They also have those different swipes at exterior doors, and what those systems do is it provides logs of who is going in where, which doors are opened. We can remotely lock them from this office. So there's a variety of different things that we're looking at from both school operations and first responder perspective, and hopefully transitioning away from the old key system, which obviously creates time-sensitive challenges when we're dealing with emergencies.
I think you know where I'm going with this, about the security updates that we were supposed to be getting. I know about the campus and being able, when you say first responders, with them being able to communicate with each other inside the building. I don't know whether that would be included in this amount, or is that somewhere else?
No, and that's the same, this would be the same location. So all of our new schools, so there are 2 different pieces to the communication aspect. All of our new schools, it's required by code. They go through this process of evaluating different first responder signals in our buildings. We're in the process also of going into all of our existing buildings, which is above and beyond, obviously, any required legislation or requirement to do the same testing and add those systems. That is something that would be drawn from this particular capital improvements program. But obviously, I think there's some other elements to communication in buildings that we're also exploring, investigating, that I do foresee this program growing in cost and magnitude in the future, but from this particular perspective, looking at it as what we have available today and moving forward with greater implementation.
Because I have a great interest in them being able to communicate with each other, which is a problem inside the Magruder building. And I've heard that it's a problem in several of our other buildings. I don't know what upgrade is needed, but I know we were waiting on a report on that.
Yes, President Wolf. So actually, this is one that I'm going to direct Mr. Hull to work with the staff to make sure we actually come back. We're giving a security update. So we're going to come back and share that with you, just so that you understand that, because there may be implications in our operating budget that may support some of these things. So we will plan to work with the board staff to make sure that we have that on the agenda so that the board is aware. But I did want to highlight a big part of, Mr. Adams said it, is about having access for first responders and things, because that was one of the recommendations that came out of the report from the Magruder incident. And we wanted to make sure that that was also one thing that we followed up on in cases. And of course, Chief Jones and I and the staff had conversations following the Uvalde incident, trying to learn from every single one of these incidents how we can continue to upgrade our systems to avoid any security breaches. So,
just for my own understanding, do first responders have a way of getting in our building without waiting for somebody to open the door for them?
Knocking you down.
I just don't know.
Yeah.
So yes, every school has a box that's located at the front door that first responders have access to, that allows them direct access into our schools. Historically, it's been used by the fire department. That is something that for for many decades has been a primary sort of first responder fire access point, but obviously over the past several years we've looked at it from the perspective of police utilization of that as well. But we do have all of our schools have the electronic access report at the front doors, which obviously is key to navigating future access. But yes, regardless of the electronics, we do have a key at every school that allows first responders direct access to the building.
Oh, thank you, because I didn't know that. But just for my own understanding here, so they can get in the front door. Is there a back entrance that they could get into if they needed to?
No, so the reason we look at it from the front door is the main fire annunciator panel is right there, so that usually is the indicator of where to go. When a fire department arrives to a scene, they have the direct access to the front door. The front annunciator panel tells them where the issue is, so that they can direct their efforts. So we have just looked at it from a front door perspective, but that key that they have allows them access to any exterior door on the building. So it's not just the front door. That's what you said about my key too, and it doesn't work on any of the doors.
My swipe stopped working too.
Mine doesn't work on the doors, so thank you.
I think that's a problem we probably may be able to easily solve in the security office, so we'll make sure we get those badges taken care of. Thank you.
I was gonna say, yeah, mine used to work,
I just want to be
but
sure
it
that they
doesn't
can
anymore.
get into the building without waiting for somebody to come and open the door if they need to. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, all of our new construction, will that include all of the upgrades in terms of like the electronic doors and things like that? I mean, is that an automatic and included in it so that we're not going back after having just built these new schools and having to replace the doors for the electronic keys and stuff?
Yes, we are looking at all of our new schools from an electronic lock perspective, but the pilot was both a new school and existing school. So the existing school obviously is as critical to us and its success as the new schools. But yes, that is a standard that we have begun to implement.
And I know I keep harping on this, but Mr. Hull, I'll be waiting for that report, because when I was at Magruder, the police are unable to communicate with each other if they need to be in the building. And that was of great concern to me in light of what had gone on.
Yes, thank you for that. And I was just receiving a text from Miss Edwards behind me here, and she is working with the team on that currently, and so we will have something to you very shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, you may continue.
All right, so we'll go to the next slide. And two more before we transition to Adrian here, and I'll be very quick. So we just wanted to highlight, again, this is directly from our construction progress report that comes every month to the Board of Education. As you can see, we do have challenges in every project of where we expect to be and where we are today. For a majority of them, we are working through and with our contracting teams to navigate any delays. We are seeing one particular delay, and you can see from the challenge here at the Woodland Elementary School, there were some elements at the beginning of that project that have caused us to rethink and and I'll touch base on the next slide, rethink the completion date, particularly from an impact to students. But for all of them, there are still a few unknowns. We were working with our partners at PEPCO and other utilities to make sure we have what we need. And we're tracking completion for all of our elementary schools for that date, but we did just want to flag it from a perspective that we are experiencing challenges at all schools. But currently, Woodland Elementary is the only one that we're recommending in the CIP for a 6-month delay of opening. The addition projects are also experiencing challenges, but I would say many of our addition projects, because it is construction on campus, if there is a slight delay, we obviously are going to look at it from the perspective of what is the most convenient and less impactful to students. And those particular projects we can transition very quickly, so we don't have to wait for a major break in our calendar like a brand new school. So we will continue to track those and provide those updates to you on a monthly basis. But if we go to the next slide, I will touch on the Woodland project, because we have met with the community. We have talked about the challenges at that particular school. And looking at all the various models of what a move-in would look like over this summer, which is their current scheduled completion, it would create sort of unprecedented impacts to that school. We would have significant construction continuing, while they're housed at the new school. And so through conversations with the school administration, through our colleagues, we are recommending a 6-month delay, which would mean they would stay in their holding school, swing space school at Grosvenor for 6 months, and then transition back to their new facility over winter break. In the conversation with the community, obviously, what some of the things they asked about were supports to the Grosvenor facility while they're staying there 6 months longer. And the principal really asked us if staff could be involved in the new building ahead of time so that they're well prepared and have chances to set up classrooms and other aspects well in advance of that winter break move. So we are going to do everything we can to accommodate both requests and support that community through this transition. But this is going to show up as as part of the recommendation to have a 6-month delay in this particular project. And with that, we're done with this portion, and we can move on to any general conversations or discussions on the funding or impacts.
Ms. Sylvester, you have a question?
Yeah, I had questions about community engagement. You described some very successful community engagement sessions at Joanne Lelick, and I just wanted to hear how you were able to get a cafeteria full of people and how you conducted the meeting so that people could understand and participate fully.
So this, I think the sort of the number, the quantity has really been around this long-term involvement with the school administration and community. I mean, this is a project that's been discussed for several years, and I think the community has really been engaged in terms of how can we be involved in the decision and next step. So the process itself was really working with the school administration, obviously doing a lot of what we typically do in our engagement. But I think since they were already very involved and active in this particular issue project, it just drew a larger crowd out to support the discussion. And again, I think that truly is a testament to the school administration, the support that that they were able to do some outreach and constant conversations with the community and let them know the importance of their engagement. So I don't know if there's one thing that could say, how this filled a cafeteria, but I think, we're just very lucky to have that happen. And we're very lucky to have, talented staff on board that Jonathan Acosta is one of our project managers, was there to help translate. And one of the challenges that we have is when we talk about technical items, sometimes the translations don't work out as well. And so to have someone there that could that knew the project, understands the complexities, to translate and have the conversations with the non-English speakers was incredibly valuable.
So you did consecutive translation? You said something in English and then you repeated it in Spanish?
Yep. That typically doesn't work when you have to take a lot of pauses in the conversations. But in this case, Mr. Acosta understands the project, so we could speak and really get through a topic, and then have Jonathan really just walk through it in Spanish from sort of start to finish. So there wasn't this sort of awkward break and no flow of conversation. So that worked very well for us to have a subject matter expert be able to present alongside of us.
That makes the biggest difference. Translating that kind of information is very difficult, and it's just hard to do when people don't get it. But if he is just saying it in Spanish, not having to translate it, he's just communicating in Spanish, then people can understand. Yeah, okay, thank you.
And when we did the questions and answers, if it was a person who was asking the question in Spanish, Jonathan would then translate it in English so that I could answer the question. I would answer the question in English, and he would translate it back in Spanish. So it was a very good flow. when we were doing the questions and answers as well.
Hence the importance of diversifying our staff so that we can have language capacity and cultural sensitivity. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Ms. Harris?
Yeah, just a couple of things. First, I just want to share how appreciative I am of the work that we're doing around the gender inclusive restrooms, and looking at the work that's come out of places like St. Paul, Minnesota, that's really been cutting edge on this work for about 8 years now. And we're seeing other school systems all around the country are adopting that model. And it's such a, it's a respectful, gender inclusive model, but it's also such a powerful anti-bullying initiative. And, I think the data is definitely supporting that as it rolls out across the country. So I'm really looking forward to seeing us being not really so much an early adopter, but we're getting there on the model. And just, appreciative too of keeping Stone Street and materials managed in that facility on the radar, because, people, first and foremost look at our facilities that are directly housing our students every day, but the work that they do there is essential. The print graphics does amazing work partnering with our students all across the county. And everybody that has one of those beautiful diplomas also sees that as well. And they do amazing work there. And they keep that facility just neat as a pin. And, you would never know from looking at it from the outside, the magic that happens on the inside. And then just generally appreciative of all the work that's going on to keep all the balls in the air so that projects are moving forward despite all the challenges. And I think people who maybe in their personal lives have been involved with trying to get a project done during the pandemic might have a different lens looking at this than people who haven't, and just see that things aren't happening as they had hoped. But I do appreciate the updates, and then the work that's happening within the individual school communities to really keep them well informed about what's happening and why it's happening. I think people may not be happy, but when they fully understand why things are happening the way they are and the work that's gone in to keeping things moving as effectively as possible, I think that kind of is they might not be happy, but they're not going to be as unhappy as they otherwise would be, as we all hear about. And I think that's just, more of the community engagement and two-way communications that we are so happy to see. So, thank you.
Ms. Mandrowski?
Yeah, really quickly, the ADA stuff, where are we in terms of funding those type of projects? I know, we frequently hear at the public hearings from the Wooten community. They've got one of our LFI programs, I think it is. I know there's still a lot of concerns, especially since their projects have kind of fallen back a little ways, in terms of even things like cracks in the sidewalks when they're trying to, we've got staff members who are trying to push wheelchairs and things like that. And just being able to address some of those, what I consider to be urgent and maybe not super high dollar needs. Where are we with that kind of stuff?
So that is actually one area that was fully funded in the last CIP. We did ask for significant additional funds in the ADA program. So $5.5 million this current year and $5.5 million next year. So the work that you described, we are going out and doing more focused ADA improvements rather than have a lot of our ADA work be incorporated into other projects. We'll certainly be fully prepared to talk about locations and how and what. Two projects I would just point out that we've really focused in on ADA. One being Burning Tree Elementary. We have our Learning Center program there, and we have been out to have many conversations and see the challenges that the non-compliance creates. So that is part of both our ADA funding, but also we have included that into a major capital project evaluation to see what we can do as soon as possible. And then a project like Wooten, as you recall, many of our challenges were, while we talked about it from an interior perspective, much of it was exterior. And so, part of the funding around Wooten was to add funding site-related funding ahead of the major capital project completion date. So we hope to get started in the design work of re-envisioning the Wooten site. And obviously, a key part of the Wooten site is not only the ADA compliance, but also the pedestrian and vehicular safety aspects of that particular site. So those are two just high-level projects that we're focused on, but we'll certainly be prepared to provide a full report of our ADA work.
Okay, I appreciate it. I just have concerns with it, the winter time coming up and everything, and like I said, I mean, for staff members pushing wheelchairs uphill with traffic concerns through the entranceway. I'm not sure if all of y'all have been over to Wooten, but, cracked, the sidewalks without the ability, it's just, I don't want to put anybody in harm's way. So, thank you.
I'm not seeing any other lights, so I think we can continue.
All right, then we'll transition it over to Adrian to just do a quick update on yesterday's discussion around the boundary recommendation and just reiterate the discussion and hopefully answer any questions that you may have today as well.
So next slide, please. And we can do one more. So again, just to recap, this is the superintendent's recommendation. It's to reassign zones C7, 8, and 9 from Clarksburg Elementary School and reassign zone C10 from Clarksburg Elementary School to Gibbs Elementary School. I can just go through quickly the map again. The yellow is the new elementary school. That's C7, C8, and C9. The blue would be Clarksburg Elementary School. That's what would remain at Clarksburg Elementary School. The green is Little Bennett. The pink is Wilson Wims. And the yellow is, or the tan color, the goldy color is William B. Gibbs Elementary School, Junior Elementary School. In this recommendation, both Little Bennett and Wilson Wims do not change. It is just a change from Clarksburg Elementary School to the new school and from Clarksburg Elementary School to Gibbs. And the next slide. Again, this is the demographic information as a result of the reassignment. And so I don't know if there are any questions on that. We certainly can answer any questions if there are. We did talk about utilization of the schools. Clarksburg Elementary School, of course, was the most impacted school, and their numbers go down. Actually, I'm just going to turn here to about 92%. The new elementary school would be at 89%, and we talked about this yesterday from a residential development perspective. Having the additional capacity at Clarksburg Elementary School made sense because they do have the majority of the development that needs to be finished there. For Gibbs Elementary School, that goes to about 90% based upon the recommendation. And both Little Bennett and Wilson Wims, again, do not change. They do have their new enrollment projections. And you can see Little Bennett is about at 92%, and Wilson Wims is about 82%, which is about 130 seats or so available. And we did talk again about sort of having a little flexibility. I know Ms. Harris brought up Wilson Wims, but having that flexibility when we talk about pre-K and blueprint and what that will mean for our elementary schools, and if there is some available capacity, having those pre-kindergarten PEP classes at that school, or schools going from half-day to full-day and needing space for them, certainly having a little bit additional capacity is a good thing. Next slide, please. So we were asked yesterday about the development. So this is the map. And again, I'll turn around so I could see it better. The hashed zones or the hashed areas is where there is still development. So I will give an example. For example, the creek side at Cabin Branch, which is right to the dot, to the left of the dot of the new elementary school, that hash zone, you could see there are, SF means single family. There are still 326 single family homes to be built in that area. Single family is both single family attached and detached. It's a combination of both. So you could see where the development is. So again, C7, C8, and C9 is the new elementary school. You could see in all of C8, there's still new development, along with C9, that's the remainder of Cabin Branch. It's about 195, I think that says 95, or 65 single family, and the multifamily is 500 units. That is the majority. You could see in the Clarksburg Elementary, which is the darker gray, there is some development, more closer to, actually, there is some actually right across the street from Clarksburg Elementary School, the existing Clarksburg Elementary School. There is a little development in Little Bennett. Very little, almost, there's just one actually home in Wilson Wims. And there is some development in the C10 zone in the Gibbs community. Now, all of these units have, because they are in the pipeline, have already been included in their enrollment projections. So these homes are reflected in the enrollment projections, what we have presented here. I do want to talk a little bit about the homes or how they are calculated, how students are calculated from the homes that are represented. So I'll just give like an example. So again, if we look at that Creekside, which is 326 single-family homes, the student generation rates, which are what we anticipate, the calculation of what we anticipate how many students are going to come from those units. And it is a calculation that comes from the Department of Planning, County Department of Planning. We do not do those student generation rates, they do them. And I was talking to Robin this morning before leaving, our demographer before leaving, and she said on average, and it's on average, if you have 100 homes, they will yield approximately 60 students K through 12. So that's K through 12, 60. So if you double that, you have 200 units, it would yield about approximately 120 students K through 12. And there is a calculation, you can find it, and it varies. Remember that there was a change that the county planning board went to. It was district-wide infill and turnover, I think. And depending on where that development fell within a community is how it then was calculated. And there are various, we also get cluster student generation rates. But again, for the most part, on average, that is what they generate. Again, depending on the area, if you have a multifamily in a community that is closer to transit, that may yield a little bit more than if you had a multifamily that wasn't closer to transit. So we do have all the information. We use all that information when we do our enrollment projections. But I wanted to just bring the example forth that when someone sees, 300 homes or 400 homes, they think 800 kids are showing up. And that's actually not the reality. And of course, again, and I've always said this, we talked about this the last time we did a boundary study, you have students coming in, but you have students going out. So if you think about, now with Clarksburg is a little bit of an exception because it continues to develop, but there are also homes that have been there now for 10, 12 years. And if you think about all of those homes and those families now that are still there, that have sent their kids through elementary school, that are in middle school and high school, those homes now don't have any more elementary school kids. And if you didn't have either new development or turnover, those elementary schools would be empty. So it's a combination. When we talk about, again, enrollment projections, it is looking at all of these variables that go into that enrollment projection. But this is what remains now, what we have in the pipeline for this area, both in the Clarksburg area and the Seneca Valley area, because Gibbs is a Seneca Valley feeder.
Oh, wait. Just 1 second. Are you finished?
Yes.
Okay. I just need a little more orderly process for this part to be sure that everybody is heard and we're clear whether or not there's any alternatives coming forward. So what I'm going to do is start by going around and asking each person. If you don't have any further questions, that's fine.
Isn't there one more slide? There is one more slide, but it's just a summary. We can actually go to it.
I just have a
And-
clarifying question about this
Okay,
slide.
go ahead with that one.
You said that that's development that's already not just approved, but in the process. Because I know, like, in the past with our CIPs, we've only considered projects, county projects, that are already underway, as opposed to ones that have been approved, but not a hole has been dug in the ground.
So actually, when we do our enrollment projections, if the planning has been approved, then we do incorporate them into our enrollment projections. But that being said, if it is a project that is being planned, but it's planned over a 6 or 8 year period, of course, you wouldn't incorporate all of the enrollment, the projected enrollment in the 6 years. You may do a portion, and then in the next 6 years, you capture the other. This is actually in the pipeline. So these projects have already been incorporated. The projections have already been incorporated into the 6-year projection.
Okay,
The
I just
students
wanted
have
to
been
specify that
incorporated in the
because
6-year
I know
projection.
that is
Yes.
where, as I had mentioned earlier in the conversation about when people complain about us not projecting appropriately, it's not that we have messed up our projections by that much, but it's the fact that we know that some more growth is coming, but because it has been approved over an expanded amount of time, we don't incorporate it all in when we
Right.
build.
So if there is
And that's-
future, if there is at some point another development that comes, a residential development, they find a pocket of infill, if it hasn't been if it has not been approved, the planning has not been approved yet, it is not part of our projections.
But everything that's approved is.
Correct.
And just to clarify, approved means the planning board
Correct.
approves the development plan. So that's what ultimately is the reference to approval.
Do you want to do the wrap-up slide before
Sure.
I start going around?
So next slide, please. So this is just a summary of the recommendation. We maintain the current walk areas for all the elementary schools. We provided continuous boundaries for all of the elementaries. The recommendation for the implementation is grades pre-K through 4, beginning in the 2023-2024 school year, so when the building opens. And then students in grade 5 would remain at their current school. We have that grandfathering when we do our parameters. So they would remain at their current school, and then it would be followed by full implementation the following year in the 2024-2025 school year. So in that 2024-2025 school year, the new elementary school would be pre-K to 5.
Okay, that wraps up the presentation. So if you turn your light on as I go around, I'll know that you have something to say. If you don't, or questions to ask. If I don't see your light, that doesn't mean that you don't. When I finish going around, if you have something to say, just let me know. Ms. Harris?
Yes, could we go back to slide 20, please? Okay, and I do appreciate seeing this, that we were talking about yesterday, helping us to visualize where we are seeing expected development residential. But I have to say, seeing this, I'm a little surprised, and I still would like to have a better understanding of why, when we look at WIMS Elementary, which is the largest capacity-wise of these, soon-to-be, 5 elementary schools, and the recommended boundary, boundary shifting to accommodate our new Clarksburg Elementary School number 9 doesn't change. The recommendation doesn't change those school boundaries at all and leaves it the biggest elementary school with the lowest utilization, looking in the out years. And I know, Ms. Karamias, yesterday you mentioned, you have some, space available, could provide some flexibility in programming, looking as we're going to scale up our pre-K. But so I just want to get a really solid understanding, because the original option 1 was to add L6, which is currently feeds into, which one?
So Little Bennett?
Little Bennett, excuse me, which but appears to be closer geographically anyway to WIMS, and it was to move L6 to the WIMS catchment, and then that came out in the final recommendation. So are we leaving the WIMS catchment area, since there's no real there's not much adjacent development in that area, or planned residential development in there? Are we leaving the boundaries the way they are because that is the school in which we will build out additional programs if they're necessary in that cluster?
So certainly that is one idea, and looking at, I just looked at WIMS to see what programs they do have. They do have a PEP program, which means that as we move forward, there is, and we've talked to the pre-K office and special ed about having both PEP and pre-K in the same building so that they can work together and collaborate. So the idea of putting a couple of classrooms of PEP, of pre-K in there, and their PEP may even expand in order to do that. There isn't, when I looked, there's about 130 seats at the end of the 6 years. That's just a handful of classrooms. So providing PEP and that additional, providing pre-K and PEP in that building would make a lot of sense. The other thing I just want to add, and we do have split articulated schools, so it's not that we don't, but Little Bennett goes to Rocky Hill and then to Clarksburg, and WIMS goes to Hallie Wells and then Clarksburg. So you would be bringing in a very small cohort of kids who after 5th grade, they would be split. And some of those students would go to Rocky Hill, and then some of them would go to WIMS. Again, not something that we don't do, which is why we had it as an option. But looking at all of the other things as far as utilization, demographics, geography, and then having that 2 more layers, which is one being a split articulated school, which now they are, neither one are, and then looking at what the impacts will be when we move forward with the pre-K and PEP. We had that discussion, and in the end, advancing those 4 factors, impacting the least amount of students that you can in order to get to where you want to be, it made sense to then leave and not reassign that one small zone from Little Bennett to Wilson WIMS.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pendrowski?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, we had received an email from a constituent in Clarksburg area, talking about or asking about the G3. Split articulation schools are not my favorite scenario, but I know that it happens and we've got them all over the place. But how many students are in, is it G3? Do we know that? How do we find that kind of information?
So we can find that out, because of course we do that when we do our boundary study, but I received the same email from her, and I read through the entire email. The issue with G3, what she was saying is, and just to take a half a step back, typically we don't, with communities, which is why staff develop options and not communities.
Correct.
That actually is, what she is saying in her email is to actually take a zone and move it. And typically what we would ask then is for the board to then ask us to go back and come up with an option that then does that. What I would say is that Clarksburg, in looking at the superintendent's recommendation, it's about at capacity. It is, can you go back one slide, please? It is at 90, I would say 90% capacity. It has about 80 seats available at the end of the 6 years. If you bring, and they do have development, if you look at the development slide, so there is development. It is a small elementary school. If you bring another zone in, will be reaching its capacity. And there were some options that we did discuss with Dr. McKnight about bringing Clarksburg Elementary School to its capacity, and the concern that it is an older school, doesn't have a whole lot of support spaces the way we build them today. Giving it, again, a little flexibility is something that we were looking for as, again, we move forward in pre-K and the whole blueprint. So we would have to, based on new enrollment projections, come up with an option, if that's what the board would ask us to do, that would then move it would be whether or not you're asking us to just move that one, or asking us to come up with another option that would then not have Gibbs split articulated. And I just want to sort of say how it became split articulated. When we did Clarksburg, Seneca, and Northwest,
Right.
we actually had in the initial moving that zone, and it would become part of the Neelsville and Seneca Valley, so it would have been part of the Seneca Valley cluster. That one zone can walk to Rocky Hill and to Clarksburg. And so it was a decision to keep them at their school, but to allow them to articulate to Rocky Hill and Clarksburg because they were walkers. So we were trying to maximize walkers.
Yes.
And we had that in a number of schools. I can think of one in particular, my home elementary school, that has a very small cohort of students that do go to a different middle school and high school than the majority of the students because they are walkers to that middle school.
Right. Similar to like Lakelands Park and Prince Orchard Northwest.
Right, Diamond is the one I was
Diamond,
thinking. They have
okay.
a small cohort that go to Ridgeview
Right.
instead of going to Lakelands for that reason.
Right. Okay. Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing any other lights. Oh, well, I think this concludes our CIP work session. We've had several insightful questions and discussions. I appreciate your coming and talking to us today. I look forward to seeing you. What's our next date? Thursday. Thank you.